Hit
Okay.
the button to start the recording.
Okay.
Just a minute.
Recording is started. Yeah, it has started.
There we go.
Okay. This meeting is now in session and is being held by electronic communications using Microsoft Teams due to the COVID-19 pandemic emergency.
All right. Thank you very much. And this is going to be. We started a little bit late because we have a short meeting today. So I'm going to go through the regular sort of agenda items here. The first thing is always the schedule of items that's coming up. And that's our usual thing. So there's going to be a couple of changes for that. And the primary reason is that we closed public comment on a large number of bundles of policies here in the middle of the month. And we received extensive feedback on the policies relating to the whole discipline concept. And so there's extensive feedback on that as well. So staff also would like to take that to and be sure that legal is okay with that content. So for that reason, that entire bundle is going to be pushed back a little bit. And we were hoping for adoption in August, and we are now shooting for September instead. So there's about a 1 month delay in order to incorporate the extensive feedback that came on the draft policies. Because otherwise we would be needing to have it turned around and back to you here in just a couple of weeks. And staff simply didn't have time to do that. So you'll be looking, we'll also bring it back to the subcommittee again. So the subcommittee meeting, we'll be seeing it in August. And then we'll be going for info and action in September.
Got it. Are there, I know that we wanted originally to have these in place for the beginning of the school year. Are there logistical implications? I'm meaning, are students going to have to sign an old code of conduct and then sign a different code of conduct? And like, how are we going to, what is our interim plan for that first couple of weeks of school while the code of conduct is still kind of nebulously not in the ether?
Yeah, that raises a really interesting question. And that's why there was a big debate around this. And staff really struggled with that trade-off, right? Of making the change after decided versus doing due diligence on the feedback we were provided. And we really wanted to do due diligence on that feedback and really spend the time to consider all of that, because this is a high priority topic. This is a high profile topic. Discipline is. So that's where the decision sort of fell around that.
But no, my question is just like Christina's, but there was no talk about the domino effect of anything else in that meeting at all.
Well, they had so we had that conversation. You know, we talked when in my conversation with Meg about it, Tasilla, who's leading it, on the trade-offs. They just didn't feel that they could get it done and due diligence in the time that's permitted here, because in practice it would need to be done in just a couple of weeks to hit the August adoption, and there was simply not enough time to turn it around.
I think as one board member, and Reed, feel free to opine differently, but just as one board member, I think we need to do the due diligence, but we also need to figure out what is the interim plan. If a student, I mean, we're talking about a couple of weeks where student discipline is still going to be governed by the old policy, and where there really can't be any communication to parents about the old policy, or there shouldn't be if it's going to change 2 weeks later. So I think we just need to figure out what the strategy is going to be and how we want to communicate about this. Like perhaps it's that's something that goes out with the first day of school packet, which I know is virtual now, but like I'm going to still call it the packet, that articulates like these are the changes, this is what's coming down the pike or something like that. I don't know, but we need to think about what that communications plan is going to be for the first 2 weeks of school and what the direction is going to be in the case where a student does require an intervention in those first couple of weeks of school. Like, are we going to just have the old policy? What's going to happen? When's the transition? Like, we got to figure all that out.
Right, but my understanding, if I remember correctly, the board does not adopt a code of conduct.
No, but we adopt the policy that then triggers the code of conduct.
Right, so so we could technically be using the new code of conduct since the policy will already essentially be done. Even if it was out of, so that's one possible solution, right? And then if the policy gets changed at the very last second, we could make a tweak around that, but changed at the info action time, which hopefully we're not going to have to do.
What are you thinking, Brian?
You see me up here looking all.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing your face, and your face scares me.
You know, what I'm thinking is that I would like to dig deeper in this to this week, because we have to have this before school start.
I
We
mean,
do.
We got 25 pages of feedback from ASAC.
I don't care.
Okay. And they're taking it to legal too. So they want it to go to legal. So they've got to remember that there's, if they want to bring it back to the subcommittee and then info action, that process is about 6 weeks. Right? So that means we would need to be done with the policy here within the next 2 weeks. That was the original plan, and just couldn't quite hit it. The other change that they had suggested, which we don't have to do, was bringing it back to the subcommittee before it goes to the board for information to present any sort of concerns that are happening during the info and action cycle. That introduces an additional delay to the process.
Sorry, I lost the bubble here. What's the problem that you can't work in 25 pages of comments from ASAC in time to meet the rest of the plan schedule and have it ready for the beginning of the school year?
That's correct.
and the feedback from other folks as well.
Yeah, and NAACP has also provided feedback, so it wasn't just ASAC, but it was some extensive feedback here.
And what happens if we don't have it ready at the beginning of the school year?
So the implications are that students frequently sign a code of conduct at the beginning of the school year. What the code of conduct version would need to be considered a draft code of conduct, because although it would essentially be done before the school year starts, right? We're not intended to make any changes after that. But if for some reason the board decides to change the policy from what we've seen, then the code of conduct would need to be revised to match the changed policy. And that's the risk.
And then they'd have to sign again.
Yeah, sign an addendum, that sort of a thing. Yes.
So what's the requirement to sign? Is that just a would-be nice practice that's happened in the past? Or, I mean,
yes,
it's still going to be the discipline policy, whether somebody signs it or not.
That's correct.
I mean, not signing it doesn't give you, a get out of jail free card.
It doesn't. It doesn't. So it's much more of a procedural issue that's used at the school level. There's nothing that requires that students have to sign the code of conduct. There's nothing in governance that requires that. So it's more of a practice.
Could we just have them do it when the new discipline policy is ready? Even if it slips a little after the beginning of classes in September.
Just tell schools they have to push that back, make a procedural change there. It could be signed as, it could be published as a current working version. And be informed when it finalized. If there were no changes, then it's done. So there are several options that we could do around this.
And what happens if a student doesn't sign? Just normally in a regular year, I'm sure nothing, right?
Well, so right. So it's like the rules are the rules, right? So we've had students who refuse to sign the acceptable use policy over the time, or parents who refuse that, and it's like, okay, but that doesn't change the fact that you're not governed by it, right? You don't have to agree to the school system's policies. It's more we more have the kids sign because it makes sure that they are aware of it, right? So that's sort of our guarantee. You knew this. These are the rules. These are the rules. and your signature represents that you have been informed that there are the rules, so you couldn't plead that you didn't know.
Yeah.
That's the real reason, so that's the real reason we typically do this. Families cannot opt out of board policy, and kids cannot opt out of board policy. The rules are the rules. They don't get to make those decisions and choose to follow what they do and don't want to do. So there's really no real serious implications like that from that change.
Do you guys mind if I speak with Meg tomorrow? Just to, number one, see if we can keep it on track. But number two, just get a clear understanding of the ramifications of not having it when school starts. And I'll follow back up with the group. How does that sound? Because I'm nervous over nothing, but I just think they should have it when school starts.
So if they don't have the new one when school starts, I mean, we're still governed by the old one, right? That's the one of record.
That's correct. That's correct.
Until we make that change.
Right. You have all these documents in place, right? You have all the documents in place. The only implications are some procedural issues and process issues. Hey, here's the new rules for this year, that sort of stuff. And we're so much run like a football team where you're going to run the play, right, based on the calendar dates. So that's the implications of it. But certainly this was requested by the people who requested this would understand the implications of it more than anybody else, perhaps, right? This was requested by Administrative Services, who was ultimately responsible for all of that. So I'm sure they weighed the implications, the trade-offs of those things.
Yeah. So Brian, Meg's handling this for Jeanette.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Might as well talk to her.
you might as well talk to her because one ramification they didn't see are, this sensitive community of Arlington, all the emails that the board office is going to receive and I'm going to receive on this whole, that's being overlooked. I'm just saying.
Right.
I mean, it's also just like the implication of like a student who the intention is like we're starting this new discipline policy on day one. So a student engages in behavior that would lead to X results under the old policy, but Y results under the new policy. How is that going to be addressed in this kind of intervening period versus just the cut date is the first day of school. Like that's a very kind of clear cut date of like you're transitioning. That's it. And so that makes it easier when it comes to actual student engagement. But yeah, I think
it does.
Yeah,
it does. But from a trade-off perspective and a risk perspective, how many kids is that going to impact? How many incidents are we talking about? Right? If we're talking, 2 incidents for the school system for the school year versus doing due diligence on feedback from one of our advisory committees and getting legal feedback, because that's the other thing they want is legal feedback on it. So
we can push Kafka and those guys to expect that.
Okay. Hey, Brian, why don't you and I talk rather than let's talk about this offline, if that's all right. Immediately after the meeting, if you've got a couple of minutes, we can chat about it.
Sure.
Yeah. Another option, I know that we were going to bring it to the subcommittee, but we could also schedule an off-cycle subcommittee meeting if we can expedite that process, especially if we can see it quickly. And then we can off-cycle so that then you don't have to wait like a full 2 weeks. Figure out how we can expedite that particular part of it.
Yeah, I already factored that in. But it's still more than zero time, right?
Yeah.
It's more than zero time. Okay, so Brian, you and I chat offline about it.
Sure.
And we can
talk today. We'll talk after this.
All right, so that was supposed to have been easier. Sorry, but that was harder. So much for easy items.
Yeah,
well, you're right. I mean, it's an interesting trade-off, and there's no clear answer to that. Other than that, coming up, the extracurricular and co-curricular activities and the addition of new sports teams remain on track for that, for the schedule, because that's separate. It's not part of the discipline, so we sort of separated those out So those are on track for information in late July and action in August. So those remain on track. It's the other discipline related sections that have been sort of separated out. Counseling crisis management we talked about last time. So that's proceeding forward. Zach's working on those revisions now. And so once we've got that done and staff is satisfied, we'll put it back on the schedule for information action. But we're proceeding with the plan that came out last time. So that's proceeding very nicely. And I've had a conversation with Zach about that. So that's proceeding forward. I think that's the only feedback on the schedule at this point. Any questions on the schedule? All right, the next thing is the feedback on existing policies. There's a bundle of policies just beginning the process for reviews. So these are staff are just beginning this work right now. Those were out. We did not receive any email comments from other board members on these. Happy to entertain any conversations now, any feedback you all have on these, or we can also take care of those digitally if feedback right now. We need a little more time to reflect on. This is a rough time of year to get this sort of stuff done.
Yep, and I have not been able to look at these, so I will send you my feedback offline.
Yeah, ditto.
They're on my list.
Okay. Just so I can let the staff know when general would you be expecting that, just because they're going to want to know.
I'm going to get to them before the Thursday board meeting because we don't actually have anything in the evenings for the next 3 days, which is a delightful change.
Okay, so by the end of the week? Is that
End of the week. Yeah, definitely by the end of the week.
Okay, I'll let them know. Then I'll come by the end of the week. 12 minutes left. The other items that I would like to think about here, so I'm a continuous improvement guy, and the subcommittee, the policy review team is going to do a bit of a retreat on how the process is working for the staff. And so we can continuously improve the process, right? We're sort of big on that. That's my thing. So I'd be interested in hearing, and this would be right now, but your perspective about what's working about the process and what's not working about the process, so that we can use that as grist for the mill for the subcommittee. For the PRT, and so they're going to make some, if any, recommended revisions to the whole process, and factoring in your considerations into that, I think would be useful for them. So the retreat will probably be in early July, so we've got 3 weeks or so. Get a sense about what's working and what's not working, and always looking at. So I always think about this. I always look at two basic criteria: effectiveness, are we accomplishing what we want to accomplish, and efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Are we getting it done efficiently, right? And as a school system, we tend to always focus on effectiveness. We tend to marginalize or minimize efficiency. But can we improve effectiveness? Can we improve efficiencies without compromising effectiveness?
Yeah.
How does that all work? So that's what we're. So if you sort of think about that and send me thoughts or comments about what's working, what's not working for you, and then I'll forward it to the PRT, and they will come up with some possible recommended changes, or not if it's perfect. But
a lot of it really well. I think this is just like refining an already good process.
Yeah. We don't need to do any radical changes. I think that sense is that we don't need any breakthrough. Fundamentally, we've got to do things differently. The reorganization is going to have some impacts on it. That's probably our biggest functional change is the reorganization. The other one that we need to really think about is succession planning. A lot of these PRT members have been on the team for 5 straight years. We've never had any turnover. We don't have any succession planning process. So those are internal staff work things that we see. Those aren't really changing the process fundamentally, but it's ensuring good succession planning. That sort of how does it function with the new chiefs concept and all the rest of that sort of stuff. Yeah. So maybe some efficiency opportunities there related to that. Welcome. So that's where bulk of it's going to go.
I like it.
Good. Thank you. And do we have to talk about the BPIPs, Christina, or are we good with that? That concept of board PIPs?
We're good with that concept. And everyone I've been previewing this, Reed, letting you know that in all my conversations with everybody, I've been previewing what's coming down the pike that we've talked about for the advisory council BPIPs and that template. So they
Okay.
all know that that's coming, and no one's going to be surprised by it, unless they completely forgot all of my conversations with them over the past month. But
That happens too.
it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just for posterity's sake, those are PIPs around board processes.
Yeah.
Or procedures around board governed processes like the board advisory committees, that sort of a thing. Not over the superintendent's general processes. We're not talking about HR processes or instruction processes or any of those. It's how the board, PIPs around how the board goes about its own business, its own internal working. And that's what a BPIP would be. Okay. All right, the last topic, and we don't necessarily need to talk about this right now, but I'll float the concept for you there, and sort of float this idea, set the stage to begin to think about it. So the Virginia School Board Association has created model policies, as you know, and about 70% of the districts in the state of Virginia have essentially adopted the VSBA model policies as their policies.
Mm-hmm.
And then they add additional things where the policies are silent, right? So that raises an interesting question for APS. When we did the renumbering schema, we matched the VSBA model policy. So our numbers, to the best of our ability, align with those numbers, but the content doesn't align. And we've never had a direction to say, okay, we're going to essentially move towards that adoption. Essentially, that the APS policies will be the VSBA model policies, and we're just going to slowly change in that direction over time. There's trade-offs, right? There's a simplicity in it, in that we get red line changes every year depending on the code of Virginia. So you can always just make your policy changes based on the code, and you're always compliant with the code. There's an efficiency to that. There's a huge efficiency to that. On the opposite side, you don't get to put your own spin on them. You don't get to put your own reflection on them. They're not APS. And so you might argue that there's an effectiveness loss because they're not your policies, they're somebody else's. So I guess I'm going to sort of just leave it at that concept, because there's a huge trade-off about which direction we want to go. Decisions made 5 years ago to adopt the numbering scheme, but not directly move in the direction of the VSBA model policies. But it's been 5 years. So it's just sort of putting back on the table for consideration. We continue to use them as models. We look at them for content and that sort of stuff.
That's what I was going to ask, that we still
Yeah.
use them kind of we use them almost as a starting point, one would say, and then we start, like, we merge where we are currently with where they are. And I think that that's probably the right role. It's just, so the model policies certainly comply with the code and the nuances of the Commonwealth of Virginia, but don't necessarily align with instructional best practices just yet. And they don't necessarily align with where we want to be going. And there are a lot of, I think of the transgender policy was something that we were the first ones in the Commonwealth to adopt. Like that, and we did our own, that the VSBA model policy eventually copied, pretty substantially. And I think that there's just a lot, I think that what we're doing right now of using it kind of as our guideline template in a loose way might be the right strategy for a little bit longer, until those model policies become more robust and more aligned with where we as a school system are going.
Sure.
What do you think, Reed? I know that that's a pretty strong opinion from my perspective.
Well, my last school district, we didn't follow the TSBA policies. We did our own thing. So
Yeah. Surrounding districts, Alexandria has adopted the VSBA model policies. Fairfax County has not. So we've got both examples. Just right.
I've had long conversations with a couple of Fairfax board members about the problems in their governance, and so just because Fairfax doesn't do it, like, that's not necessarily a sign of something good.
Yeah.
No.
I mean,
and the one time we were going to do it, we were like, it was political. Someone was upset with the policy office, and we thought about doing it, but we never did do it. So the transgender thing that Christina just pointed out to me is why we should keep doing it for now.
Yeah, and like keep using them as an example. Like,
Exactly.
okay, there's something in the model policy that's not in our policy that needs to come into our policy, and we can follow that as Like we should generally kind of follow the structure, and like if they have some good organization, then we'll use that.
Alexa,
If they have poor organization,
apricot on the Costco list.
Yeah. The trade-off, and I'll just sort of put this out there, is that the way we do it is more resource intensive.
yeah,
Right.
certainly.
And APS does not have a policy office. This is just a job assignment for a bunch of individuals,
Yeah.
right? So we're not there's no budgetary resource per se to support the work. So that's just something for you to think about from a sustainability perspective, about how that would all play together. And if we want to do that and take our policy seriously, do you want to consider that through sort of a budgeting perspective and put resources into that? So something to think about for this budget cycle comes up, because there's a little bit of a misalignment right now. It's just a job assignment to people, which means they're not doing something else. And that's a new job assignment that came up a couple of years ago. So just something to consider as that's all happening going forward.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's all I had.
Sounds good.
You got anything else? So we don't have any more meetings scheduled, do we?
We were going to talk about the schedule today.
Let's talk about the schedule.
We were
We talked
gonna-
about mornings, right?
I think so.
Yes.
Reed, are you on mute?
Yes. I'm on mute, yes. Because we're going to have to be there in person.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that's going to mean for your work schedule, Christina.
It's easier if I have to be there in person. It's easier to do it tacked the very beginning of the day or the very end of the day. Middle of the day tends to be bad, because then you have the transit associated with going to the office and then coming back. But if I go to the office at the beginning of the day, I can then decide if I want to just work from the office all day or if I want to go home, or vice versa. If it's at the end of the day and I have to stay for another meeting anyways, then like I'm staying for another meeting anyway. So that's my personal preference. What do you think, Reed?
I can accommodate that. That's fine.
Yeah. And then that means that we're not asking staff to meet outside of regular business hours. It's just beginning of the workday or end of the workday. Yeah.
So how does that work for you, Matt and Brian?
Beginning of the workday works fine for me.
Okay.
Yeah, and beginning of the workday is probably better, because sometimes at the end of the workday, things tend to develop
Exactly.
over the course of the day, and you sort of get caught up on stuff. But usually, beginning of the workday is pretty.
Yep.
It's pretty consistent. Things don't tend to come up very often first thing in the morning.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
So I think that probably beginning of the day would work better for me.
I like that one. Yeah.
in general.
Great.
Yeah.
I like this.
So do you have a day in mind?
Doesn't matter to me at all.
But meaning I will avail myself.
Not Mondays.
Not Mondays, no. I mean, let me.
Can we move them from Mondays? Because a Monday meeting at like bright and early as the first thing in my week just sounds like a lot. I normally take like Monday mornings to just kind of like gather myself again from the weekend and get my week together.
Tuesday mornings are bad for me. I have a recurring Tuesday meeting at 9. That I have to be home for, because that's where my work docking station is. And I guess once a month on Wednesdays, I have 9 o'clock. But we can probably just, schedule to avoid those. Otherwise, Thursdays seem to be fine.
Sorry.
The only issue with Thursday is that they're really going to have all work sessions and closed meetings on Thursdays. Wednesdays are totally fine for me. Thursdays are fine. Friday mornings are also fine. Mondays, the only issue with Mondays is just the very beginning of the week, and normally that's like the recovery time.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's a Monday.
It's a Monday. It's a Monday.
Fridays, I've got a standing meeting at 9:30.
Okay.
So
it sounds like Wednesdays, making sure we're avoiding your once a month.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, are we talking 8 o'clock?
To do an 8, to a 9.
Works for me. 8 works for me too.
Okay,
Works for me.
so I can do that on Friday, and I can just stay in the office and have my 9 o'clock, 9:30
You mean on Wednesdays?
on
Or-
Fridays.
Oh, I thought we were saying Wednesdays.
Oh,
And
Wednesday's fine. We can work around my once a month thing.
yeah,
That's fine.
because if we do an 8 to 9 on Wednesdays, you said that your Wednesday thing is a 9 o'clock, right?
Yes.
So you could take the 9 o'clock from the office if for some reason we had to do a subcommittee meeting on the Wednesday that you had that same meeting.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, so for the sequencing, it worked well having alternate weeks with the policy review team. So whatever your Wednesday schedule is Reed, we can just sort of schedule opposite that,
Okay.
if that works out.
Okay.
How often do we want to meet in the summer? So I think that'll be for the school year. That's probably going to be important. I think we said that we would want to put them on the calendar for the summer and then simply not hold them in the event we don't need them, right?
Yeah, agreed. I'm not going to be in town. I'm flying back the morning of Wednesday the 7th. So we couldn't necessarily start the Wednesday the 7th, like with this plan on the Wednesday the 7th is the only caveat. What week of the month is your Wednesday commitment, Reed? Is it
First Wednesday of the month.
great? Though the 7th doesn't work anyways. But if we
Right.
did the 14th and if we did the 2nd and 4th week of the month, does that make sense?
Yeah.
What I'm saying out loud? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's. I think that's.
Right. And then second and fourth, so I could do the PRT on the first and the third. First and third, second and fourth, then they're just automatic weeks. And occasionally everybody gets a break.
Yeah, and then like we'll just alternate, like we'll adjust for spring break or whatever for the very end of the year, and like holidays.
All right.
So instead of every 2 weeks, we'll be doing second and the fourth day of each month.
We're doing every 2 weeks. We're just doing the second Wednesday and the fourth Wednesday of each month.
Mathematically, it may work out that there's a 3-week gap occasionally
Correct.
because the math doesn't quite work.
Close enough.
Close enough. It's very close.
Does that make sense? Reed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about I put together a list of dates and then share it with you all, and you can just look at it real quick and make sure there's nothing that stands out that won't work on that schedule.
Okay.
Melanie's the best.
Okay.
No, right?
That's fine.
Okay. Hey, Melanie, would you mind doing the same thing for the PRT too while you're at it?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the second and fourth Wednesdays for the PRT. I'm sorry, the first and the third for PRT, second and fourth for the subcommittee. That way we can look at the whole thing holistically.
Perfect. Yep.
Perfect. All righty.
Cool.
That's that.
Efficient. Go team.
All right. Sounds good.
Sounds good. So our next meeting will be in July 14th. 14th of July. You guys are going to send me any written feedback you've got by Friday. And if there's an item that comes up that requires your attention, I'll sort of deal with it via email or asynchronously. That's all right. I don't think there's anything that's going to require anybody's attention over the next over the next 3 weeks, but 4 weeks. But if there is, we'll just handle it via email.
Yeah, and if we need to review, I told this directly to Jeanette in a different conversation. I think at the community high school graduation, last week is a blur. But if we need to review any interim drafts of the policy as they're like consolidating all that feedback, I'm happy to do that offline.
Okay.
Like if it makes sense for them to send us like an interim just to like bounce an idea off of us, that's totally fine too. Yeah.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's it then.
Cool.
Reed, you can adjourn the meeting.
Okay. I'll do that. And this meeting is adjourned.
Great.
Take care.
Good. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.